August 8th, 1963. A Royal Mail train travelling from Glasgow to London was forced to stop at a rigged signal in the Buckinghamshire countryside. What happened next would become the most infamous heist in British history. In the dead of night, 15 men intercepted a train carrying over £2.5 million in used banknotes. It was a sum equivalent to tens of millions today, and the robbery was executed in under 30 minutes. By dawn, police discovered the train abandoned, with its high-value coach emptied. The sheer audacity and precision of the crime stunned a nation and launched one of the largest investigations Britain had ever seen. The great train robbery was not the work of amateurs. The gang was a loose coalition of London's criminal underworld, experienced thieves, logistical planners, and men with deep connections to organised crime in the capital. Among the key figures was Bruce Reynolds, widely considered the mastermind. Reynolds was charismatic and meticulous, a career criminal who reportedly modelled himself on gentleman thieves from popular fiction. Buster Edwards and Gordon Goody were among the muscle and logistics men, hardened criminals from South London who had spent years operating on the fringes of legitimate society. Charlie Wilson was known for his calm demeanour and organisational skills. Perhaps the most colourful figure was Ronnie Biggs, whose later escape from prison would make him the robbery's most famous participant, despite playing a relatively minor role in the heist itself. The gang reportedly recruited a retired train driver to move the locomotive after the robbery. However, accounts suggest this individual struggled with the unfamiliar controls, forcing the gang to adapt their plan under pressure. What united these men was ambition and audacity. They believed they could pull off the crime of the century and disappear. But their confidence would prove to be both their greatest asset and their ultimate undoing. The plan had been months in the making. The gang had received inside information about the high-value coach on the Glasgow to London mail train, a coach that regularly carried large sums of used banknotes destined for destruction. The gang tampered with trackside signals at Sears Crossing, near Cheddington, using a glove over the green light and a battery to power a false red signal. The driver, seeing the red, brought the train to a halt exactly where the gang wanted. The high-value coach was uncoupled from the rest of the train and moved forward to Bridego Bridge, where a waiting vehicle convoy stood ready. The operation was carried out with military-like coordination. Inside the high-value coach, postal workers had been sorting and packaging banknotes. The gang allegedly overwhelmed the staff and formed a human chain to pass 120 mailbags down the railway embankment and into their vehicles. The total haul was staggering, approximately £2.5 million in used banknotes. In today's terms, that figure would be equivalent to roughly £50 to £60 million. It was an almost incomprehensible sum. The gang retreated to a farmhouse called Leatherslade Farm, roughly 27 miles from the robbery site. It had been purchased weeks earlier under a false name, intended as a hideout where the men would lay low and divide the money. At the farm, the gang reportedly played Monopoly with real banknotes while waiting for the heat to die down. But their plan called for the farm to be burned down after they left, a critical step that was never carried out. The robbery made instant headlines around the world. Newspapers dubbed it the crime of the century. The public was simultaneously outraged and fascinated, and the pressure on police to solve it was immense. Buckinghamshire Constabulary immediately launched one of the largest investigations in British policing history. Detective Superintendent Gerald MacArthur and Detective Chief Superintendent Jack Slipper would become central figures in the pursuit. The breakthrough came when a local herdsman reported suspicious activity at Leatherslade Farm. Police descended on the property and found it abandoned, but far from clean. The gang had left behind a treasure trove of forensic evidence. Fingerprints were everywhere, on ketchup bottles, on beer cans, on the Monopoly board. The gang's failure to destroy the farm as planned had left investigators with an abundance of identifiable prints linking specific individuals to the scene. Investigators also traced the purchase of the farm through property records and identified the vehicles used in the robbery. The gang had used a truck and several Land Rovers, some of which were found at the farm, repainted but still traceable. Meanwhile, large sums of cash began surfacing across London. Police monitored known associates of suspected gang members. Tips from informants pointed detectives toward specific individuals in South London's criminal networks. One by one, the suspects were identified. The fingerprint evidence from the farm was matched against existing criminal records. Within weeks of the robbery, police had compiled a list of prime suspects and began making arrests. The investigation was not without controversy. Questions were raised about the reliability of some fingerprint evidence and whether proper procedures had been followed at Leatherslade Farm. Defense attorneys would later challenge these methods in court. The arrests came swiftly. Within months of the robbery, the majority of the gang had been apprehended. Police raided homes across London and the surrounding counties, recovering significant amounts of cash hidden in walls, caravans, and lock-up garages. Roger Caudry was among the first arrested, found in Bournemouth with over $140,000 in cash. Others were picked up across the country. The sheer volume of money made it nearly impossible to hide. The notes were bulky, and spending them attracted attention. Charlie Wilson was arrested at his home in Clapham. Bruce Reynolds, however, proved far more elusive. He fled the country and reportedly lived abroad for years before finally being apprehended in 1968. Most of the arrested men denied involvement. They offered alibis, claimed mistaken identity, and challenged the forensic evidence. But the fingerprints from Leatherslade Farm proved devastatingly difficult to explain away. Despite the arrests, a significant portion of the stolen money was never recovered. Estimates suggest that only around £400,000 was found. The rest, over £2 million, seemingly vanished, fueling decades of speculation about hidden stashes. By early 1964, 13 members of the gang were in custody and awaiting trial. The stage was set for one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in British legal history. The trial began in January 1964 at Aylesbury Assizes in Buckinghamshire. It was one of the longest criminal trials in English history at that time, lasting from January into April. The proceedings drew intense media coverage. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the fingerprint evidence recovered from Leatherslade Farm. Each defendant's prints were meticulously matched and presented. Defense teams challenged the chain of custody and collection methods, but the evidence held. The verdicts came down in April 1964. 12 of the 13 defendants were found guilty of conspiracy to rob and armed robbery. The conviction sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the criminal underworld alike. The sentences were extraordinary. The ringleaders received 30 years each, a sentence length that stunned the public and the legal community. Many felt the punishment was disproportionately harsh, more befitting crimes, far more serious than robbery. The severity of the sentences sparked a national debate about proportionality in criminal justice. Editorials questioned whether the judge, Justice Edmund Davies, had been influenced by public pressure to make an example of the robbers. But the story did not end with the sentences. In 1965, Ronnie Biggs escaped from Wandsworth Prison using a rope ladder and a waiting furniture van. He fled first to Paris, then to Australia, and finally to Brazil, where he lived as a fugitive for decades. The Great Train Robbery became a cultural touchstone in Britain and beyond. It inspired films, books, television dramas, and endless public fascination. The robbers achieved a strange celebrity status that blurred the line between criminal and folk hero. The robbery fundamentally changed how Britain approached security for high-value mail transport. Royal Mail overhauled its procedures, and the case became a landmark study in both criminal methodology and investigative response. The fates of the robbers varied widely. Some served their sentences and returned to quiet lives. Others, like Buster Edwards, struggled with the aftermath. Edwards reportedly ran a flower stall outside Waterloo Station after his release. Ronnie Biggs finally returned to Britain voluntarily in 2001, frail and in poor health. He was immediately arrested and returned to prison, where he served several more years before being released on compassionate grounds in 2009. 60 years on, the Great Train Robbery endures in the public imagination, a reminder that even the most meticulously planned crimes leave traces, and that the line between daring and reckless is thinner than any criminal cares to admit. Of the roughly £2.5 million stolen that August night, the vast majority was never recovered. The missing money remains one of Britain's most enduring criminal mysteries. A new case drops every day. Subscribe so you never miss one.